The distant crack of thunder rolled across the barren plains as Della Fairchild clutched her children close, squinting at the darkening horizon. The wagon wheel had finally given out 3 miles back, leaving them stranded on an unfamiliar trail as storm clouds gathered ominously overhead. At 32, Della had faced hardship before, but never alone with 3 hungry children in a wilderness that seemed determined to swallow them whole. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered 8-year-old Emma, her small fingers digging into Della's faded calico skirt. Beside her, 10-year-old Samuel stood stoically, trying to appear brave for his younger siblings, while 5-year-old Michael buried his face against his mother's hip, his little body trembling. "Hush now," Della soothed, though her own heart hammered with uncertainty. "We'll find our way." It was 1876, nearly 6 months since her husband Thomas had succumbed to the fever that swept through St. Louis. With debts mounting and nowhere to turn, Della had gathered their meager possessions and the children to journey west to her cousin's home in Colorado Territory. The promise of a new beginning had sustained her through weeks of difficult travel, but now, lost on the vast Nebraska plains with night approaching, that hope seemed foolish. "We need to find shelter," she murmured, more to herself than to the children. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she scanned the horizon, praying for a sign of civilization. Samuel pointed suddenly. "Mama, look! Smoke!" Della followed his gaze, spotting a thin tendril of smoke rising in the distance. "Good eyes, Samuel," she praised, relief washing through her. "That means people. We'll head that way." Gathering what provisions they could carry from their abandoned wagon, Della led her children toward the promise of shelter. The rain fell harder now, soaking through their clothes and turning the earth beneath their feet to treacherous mud. Michael stumbled, crying out as he fell to his knees. "Up you go, little man," Della said, hoisting him onto her hip despite the ache in her arms. They trudged on as thunder crashed overhead and lightning split the sky. After what seemed an eternity, a small cabin came into view, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Della hesitated at the edge of the property, aware of the dangers that could await a woman alone with children in these untamed territories. Before she could decide whether to approach, the cabin door swung open. A tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the light. "Who's out there?" called a deep voice, firm but not threatening. "Please," Della called back, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "We're lost travelers. Our wagon broke down. We have children." The figure strode toward them, resolving into a man as he drew closer. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain, and a duster that flapped around his long legs. When he reached them, he pushed his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that assessed them quickly. "Name's Preston Flynn," he said. "You folks look half-drowned. Come inside." Relief made Della's knees weak. "Thank you. I'm Della Fairchild. These are my children Samuel, Emma, and Michael." Preston Flynn nodded, his expression softening as he looked at the bedraggled children. Without hesitation, he scooped Michael up from Della's tired arms. "This way," he said, turning toward the cabin. "Storm's only getting worse." The interior of the cabin was modest but neat, with a fire crackling in a stone hearth. The children huddled near the warmth while Preston disappeared into another room, returning with blankets. "You can dry off by the fire," he said, handing the blankets to Della. "I'll make some coffee and see what I can rustle up for supper." As she wrapped her shivering children in the rough woolen blankets, Della studied their rescuer. Preston Flynn moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. He was older than her by perhaps 5 or 6 years, with streaks of silver at his temples, but his movements were fluid and strong. A gun belt hung on a peg by the door, expected in these parts, but the cabin held unexpected touches. Books stacked on a small table, a fiddle hanging on the wall, a colorful quilt draped over a rocking chair. "Mr. Flynn," Della began, once the children were settled, "I can't thank you enough for taking us in. We were heading to Colfax in Colorado Territory, to my cousin's homestead, but I fear we've strayed far off course." Preston handed her a steaming mug. "You have indeed, Mrs. Fairchild. Colfax is more than 100 miles southwest of here. You're in Nebraska Territory now, not far from the settlement of Pine Ridge." Della's heart sank. 100 miles? But we're nearly out of provisions and our wagon. "One problem at a time," Preston said, his voice calm. "Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's to be done." True to his word, Preston fed them a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. The children, exhausted from their ordeal, fell asleep soon after, curled together on a pallet Preston made up near the fire. "Your husband?" Preston asked quietly, once the children were asleep. "Passed 6 months ago. Fever." Della kept her voice steady with practiced effort. "We couldn't stay in St. Louis. Too many debts, and no way to pay them." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "These territories are hard on women alone." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Flynn." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I can see that. And it's Preston, please." "Preston," she agreed. "May I ask, do you live here alone?" Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. "Just me and my horses. Been that way for some years now." Della wanted to ask more, but sensed it wasn't the time. Instead, she said, "In the morning, if you could point us in the right direction toward Colfax." "Mrs. Fairchild." He interrupted gently. "You said yourself your wagon is broken beyond repair. You're low on provisions with 3 young children. Even if I gave you one of my horses, which I'd be glad to do, it would be a dangerous journey." Della felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "We have nowhere else to go." Preston was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he looked up, his expression resolute. "Stay. I beg your pardon? Stay here. At least until we can arrange safer passage for you to Colfax, or until you decide what you want to do next. I have the room, and it would be no trouble." Della studied him, searching for hidden motives but finding only sincere concern. Still, caution made her hesitate. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition," Preston said firmly. "It would be wrong to send you back out there unprepared. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I think your little ones have had enough adventures for now." Della looked at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful for the first time in days. The thought of dragging them back into uncertainty made her heart ache. 2 weeks, Preston continued. "Stay 2 weeks. Rest, replenish your supplies. I can help you send word to your cousin that you've been delayed. After that, if you still want to continue to Colfax, I'll see that you get there safely." It was a generous offer, more than generous from a stranger. Yet something in Preston's steady gaze told Della he could be trusted. 2 weeks, she agreed finally, "and I insist on earning our keep. I can cook, clean, mend whatever is needed." Preston nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then it's settled. Welcome to Pine Ridge, Mrs. Fairchild." "Della, please," she said. "And thank you, Preston. Truly." As Della settled beside her children that night, listening to the rain drumming on the cabin roof, she felt, for the first time since Thomas's death, that perhaps Providence hadn't abandoned them after all. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that Preston Flynn's cabin was more substantial than Della had perceived in the storm. It was a proper ranch house, with the main cabin connected to a smaller second structure that served as his office and a spare room. Beyond that stretched corrals, a barn, and open pastureland where horses grazed. In daylight, she could see they were situated in a picturesque valley, with pine-covered hills rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," she breathed, stepping onto the porch where Preston was already at work mending a saddle. He glanced up, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Flynn Ranch isn't the biggest spread in these parts, but it suits me. The children are still sleeping." Yes, poor dears were exhausted. Della pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to fetch our remaining belongings from the wagon today." "Already taken care of," Preston said, setting aside his work. "Rode out at first light. Your trunk and other possibles are in the barn. Wasn't much to salvage from the wagon itself. That wasn't your only problem." Della felt a rush of gratitude tinged with embarrassment. "You shouldn't have gone to such trouble." "I could have no trouble," he interrupted. "Besides, these hills can be dangerous for those who don't know them. Rattlesnakes, cougars occasionally, not to mention two-legged predators." A chill ran through Della despite the warm morning. "You mean outlaws?" Preston nodded grimly. "Railroads bringing more settlers, which brings more opportunities for those looking to prey on travelers. One of the reasons I was concerned about you folks continuing your journey unprepared." Before Della could respond, the door banged open and Samuel emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mama, where are we?" "Good morning, Samuel," Della said, crossing to him. "This is Mr. Flynn's ranch. Remember, he helped us in the storm last night." Samuel eyed Preston warily. "Are we staying here?" "For a little while," Della confirmed. "Until we can continue our journey safely." The boy seemed to consider this, his young face serious beyond his years. "What happened to our wagon?" "All our things." Preston set down his tools and approached, crouching to Samuel's eye level. "I brought your family's belongings here this morning, son. The wagon itself wasn't worth saving, I'm afraid. But I was thinking, if you're interested, I could use a hand with the horses later. Got a new foal that needs looking after." Samuel's eyes widened. "A baby horse? Really?" Preston nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Really. Born just 3 days ago. Prettiest little filly you ever saw." "Can I, Mama?" Samuel asked, excitement breaking through his customary reserve. Della smiled, grateful for Preston's kindness toward her son. "If Mr. Flynn doesn't mind." "Preston," he corrected gently. "And I'd welcome the help." Over the next several days, a routine began to take shape. Della insisted on taking charge of the household duties, rising early to prepare breakfast and tend to the washing and mending that had accumulated in the bachelor household. Preston, she discovered, was a competent cook himself, but he seemed pleased to relinquish the domestic tasks, focusing instead on his ranch work. The children adapted quickly to their new surroundings. Samuel shadowed Preston whenever permitted, soaking up knowledge about horses and ranch life with an eagerness that warmed Della's heart. Emma discovered Preston's small collection of books and spent hours reading on the porch, while Michael, always the most outgoing of her children, chattered endlessly to Preston about anything that crossed his active young mind. On their 5th day at Flynn Ranch, Della was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Preston appeared from the barn, hand resting casually on his holstered revolver as a rider came into view. "Morning, Doc," Preston called, his posture relaxing as he recognized the visitor. The newcomer, an older man with a silver beard and kind eyes, dismounted with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Preston," he greeted, then turned curious eyes to Della. "And who might this be?" "Dr. Howard Miller, meet Mrs. Della Fairchild," Preston said. "And her children are around here somewhere. Their wagon broke down in the storm last week, and they're staying here while making arrangements to continue to Colorado. Dr. Miller tipped his hat. Madam, pleasure. Though I must say you're the first guests Preston's had out here in. Well, I can't rightly remember when. Della noticed a warning glance from Preston to the doctor, but she smiled warmly. Mr. Flynn has been extraordinarily kind to my family, Doctor. We're very grateful. I've no doubt, the doctor said, his eyes twinkling. Preston's a good man, though he does his best to hide it. Did you ride all this way for social calls, Doc? Preston asked dryly. The doctor chuckled. In fact, I came to check on Widow Jensen's boy the farm about 4 miles east. Thought I'd stop here on my way back to town. See if you needed anything. We're well supplied, but thank you, Preston said. Though since you're here, would you mind looking at Mrs. Fairchild's youngest? He had a cough last night that concerned her. Della started in surprise. Preston, that's not necessary. Michael seems much better today. Better to be sure, Preston said firmly. Doc's here now. Dr. Miller retrieved his medical bag from his saddlebag. Happy to take a look, Mrs. Fairchild. No trouble at all. Inside, Dr. Miller examined Michael, who had indeed recovered from his nighttime cough but submitted to the examination with unusual patience, fascinated by the doctor's stethoscope. Healthy as a horse, Dr. Miller pronounced finally. Just a bit of dust in the lungs, I expect. Common out here. He ruffled Michael's hair. You keep drinking your water and getting plenty of fresh air, young man. While Michael ran outside to find his siblings, the doctor packed away his instruments. Fine children you have, Mrs. Fairchild. Thank you, Della said. They've been through much this past year, but they're resilient. Dr. Miller nodded sympathetically. Preston mentioned you're widowed. My condolences. Thank you, Della said quietly. It's been difficult, but we're managing. The doctor glanced toward the door where Preston stood talking with Samuel outside. Well, you seem to have found a good place to rest a while. Preston keeps to himself mostly, but there's no finer man in these parts. Della followed his gaze, watching as Preston patiently demonstrated to Samuel how to check a horse's hooves. He's been very kind, she agreed softly. Kind, yes, Dr. Miller said, studying her. But also different since you arrived. I haven't seen him this animated in years. Della felt her cheeks warm. We're temporary guests, Doctor. Nothing more. Of course, he said, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. Well, I should be on my way. Town council meeting tonight, and they get tetchy if the mayor is late. You're the mayor? Della asked, surprised. Dr. Miller chuckled. Of Pine Ridge, such as it is. Small settlement, but growing. You should come to town before you continue your journey. Saturday's market day quite lively. That sounds lovely, Della said. I'll ask Preston if he would mind taking us. After the doctor departed, Preston approached her, looking slightly self-conscious. Doc talk your ear off? Not at all. He seems a good man. Della hesitated, then added. He invited us to visit town on Saturday. For the market. Preston rubbed the back of his neck. I was planning to mention that. Thought you might like to get some supplies, maybe things for the children. I need to go anyway, got some business with the blacksmith. We wouldn't want to impose further. It's no imposition, Preston said firmly. Besides, might do you good to see other faces besides this ugly mug. Della smiled. There's nothing wrong with your face, Preston Flynn. He looked startled, then pleased before clearing his throat. Yes, well, Saturday then. As he walked back to the barn, Della found herself watching him with new awareness. Preston Flynn was indeed a handsome man, in a rugged, unpolished way. But more than that, there was a depth of character to him, a steadiness that she found increasingly compelling. Saturday dawned clear and mild. Della spent extra time helping the children prepare for their first visit to town, brushing Emma's hair until it shone and ensuring Michael's face was scrubbed clean of the dirt. He seemed to attract like a magnet. "You look mighty fine," Preston said when they emerged from the house, his eyes lingering on Della. She had donned her best remaining dress, a blue calico that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. "Thank you," she said, feeling oddly shy. "We're ready when you are." Preston had hitched his wagon, a sturdy vehicle with room for all of them. He helped each child up, then offered his hand to Della. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, and the casual strength with which he lifted her onto the seat sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Pine Ridge proved to be larger than Della had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with businesses, a schoolhouse, a church, and even a small hotel. The market sprawled across the town square, with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handcrafted goods. "Children need new clothes," Preston remarked as they walked among the stalls. "They're growing like weeds." Della sighed. "Yes, but our funds are limited. I can make do with what we have." Preston frowned. "I've been meaning to speak with you about that. You've been working hard at the ranch, cooking, cleaning, mending my sorry excuse for a wardrobe. That's worth something." "Preston, no. You've given us shelter, food, and you've more than earned your keep." He insisted. "I'm not offering charity, Della. It's wages fairly earned." Before she could argue further, he pressed some bills into her hand. "Get what the children need, and something for yourself." Della stared at the money more than she'd expected. "Preston, this is too much." His expression softened. "Let me do this, please." Something in his eyes made refusal impossible. "Thank you," she said simply. The day passed pleasantly as they explored the town. Preston seemed to know everyone, introducing Della and the children with a quiet pride that suggested he considered them more than mere guests. Many townsfolk expressed surprise at seeing the reclusive rancher in their midst, especially in the company of a family. "Preston Flynn as I live and breathe," called a round-faced woman from behind the counter of the general store. "And with company. The world must be ending." Preston's ears reddened. "Mrs. Baxter, this is Mrs. Della Fairchild and her children. They're staying at my place while arranging passage to Colorado." Mrs. Baxter's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, welcome to Pine Ridge, Mrs. Fairchild. Any friend of Preston's is a friend of ours, rare as those might be." "Don't start, Edith," Preston warned, though there was no heat in it. Mrs. Baxter winked at Della. "He's a good one, our Preston. Just needs to remember there's more to life than horses and hard work." She turned to the children. "Now, who wants a piece of rock candy, As the children crowded around the candy jars, Della felt Preston's hand brush lightly against the small of her back. "Don't mind Edith," he murmured. "She's appointed herself matchmaker for the entire county." Della looked up at him, noting the warmth in his eyes. "And does she have much success?" A slow smile spread across his face. "More than you'd think." The moment was broken by Michael's excited voice. "Mama, Mr. Preston, look at the big candy stick I got." By late afternoon, the wagon was loaded with their purchases, fabric and ready-made clothing for the children. Seeds for the kitchen garden Della had started at the ranch, and a few modest personal items she'd allowed herself. Preston had disappeared briefly during their shopping and returned with a mysterious package that he stowed carefully under the seat. As they prepared to leave town, Emma tugged at Della's sleeve. "Mama, look, a school." Della followed her daughter's gaze to the white-clapboard schoolhouse. Emma had always loved learning, devouring any book she could get her hands on. Preston noticed her interest. "Term starts in 2 weeks. Good teacher, from what I hear. Miss Abernathy. Strict but fair." Della sighed. "Emma would love it. She misses school terribly." Then she should go, Preston said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Preston, we won't be here. We're leaving for Colfax soon, remember? He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, unless you weren't. Della's heart skipped. Weren't what? Leaving. His eyes met hers, serious and intent. Della, I've been thinking. There's no reason you couldn't stay in Pine Ridge. The children seem happy here. Samuel's taking to ranch life like he was born to it. Emma could attend school. There's a community here. Good people. And what would we live on? Della asked, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. Where would we stay? Preston cleared his throat. With me. At the ranch. There's plenty of room, and God knows the place runs better with you there. Della stared at him, trying to understand what he was proposing. Preston, are you offering me employment? As your housekeeper? No, he said firmly. That's not what I mean at all. But before he could elaborate, Michael came running up, his face sticky with candy, followed by Samuel, who was proudly carrying a new fishing pole Preston had bought him earlier. Can we go now, Mr. Preston? Michael asked. You promised to show me the new puppies at your friend's farm. Preston ruffled the boy's hair. So I did, partner. Let's get going. As they drove out of town, Della found herself torn between confusion and a growing hope she hardly dared acknowledge. What exactly was Preston suggesting? And why did the thought of staying at Flynn Ranch fill her with such unexpected joy? The puppies at the neighboring farm proved a delightful distraction for the children, giving Della time to sort through her tumultuous thoughts. When they finally headed back to the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in gold and crimson. Preston was uncharacteristically quiet during the drive, his expression thoughtful as he guided the horses homeward. Only when they reached the ranch and the children had tumbled out of the wagon, eager to show off their new possessions, did he turn to Della. About what I said in town, he began. I didn't express myself well. It's all right, Della said, though uncertainty twisted in her stomach. We don't need to discuss it now. We do, Preston insisted, reaching for the mysterious package he'd stowed under the seat. Here, I got this for you today. Della unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with intricate floral designs. I noticed you writing sometimes, in the evenings, Preston explained, in that tattered little notebook. Thought you might like something nicer. Preston, it's beautiful, Della breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. But far too expensive. Do you like it? Yes, of course, but then it's not too expensive, he said simply. Della looked up at him, suddenly understanding that the journal represented something more significant than a mere gift. Thank you. Preston nodded, seemingly relieved. You're welcome. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said, Della, about staying, not as my housekeeper or employee, as... He trailed off, struggling for words. As what, Preston? Della asked softly, her heart pounding. Before he could answer, Samuel came running back to the wagon. Mr. Preston, come quick. There's a strange horse in the corral. Preston frowned, instantly alert. Stay here, he told Della, jumping down from the wagon and striding toward the barn, hand moving instinctively to his holster. Della gathered the younger children and followed at a distance, worry replacing the tender moment that had been building between them. As they approached the barn, she saw Preston standing tense but no longer alarmed, facing a smartly dressed man who had dismounted from an impressive bay stallion. Mrs. Fairchild, Preston called, his voice carefully neutral. This gentleman says he's looking for you. Della moved closer, confusion giving way to recognition as she saw the visitor's face. Mr. Reynolds? The man removed his hat, revealing thinning hair and sharp features. Mrs. Fairchild, What a relief to find you safe. Your cousin has been beside herself with worry. My cousin, Della echoed, puzzled. But how did you, Mrs. Helena Barrett, yes? Your cousin in Colfax. Mr. Reynolds produced an official-looking document from his coat pocket. I'm Nathan Reynolds, attorney at law. Mrs. Barrett hired me to locate you after receiving word that you'd left St. Louis but never arrived in Colfax. Della glanced at Preston, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Yes, our wagon broke down in the storm last week. Mr. Flynn kindly took us in. Reynolds nodded briskly. Fortunate indeed. Well, I'm here to escort you and your children safely to Colfax, as per Mrs. Barrett's instructions. We can leave at first light tomorrow. The abrupt pronouncement left Della speechless. Everything was happening too quickly. She had just begun to contemplate a future here with Preston, and now this stranger was proposing to whisk them away before she'd even had time to understand what Preston was offering. Mr. Reynolds, Preston spoke up, his voice measured. It's nearly dark. Surely there's no need to rush Mrs. Fairchild's departure. The children are settled here, and the journey to Colfax is not without its hazards. Reynolds eyed Preston with barely concealed disdain. I assure you, sir, I'm well equipped to ensure their safety. Mrs. Barrett is most anxious to see her cousin and the children. And I appreciate her concern, Della said, finding her voice at last. But Mr. Flynn is right. We can't possibly be ready to leave by morning. The children are tired from our outing today, and there are preparations to be made. Reynolds seemed about to argue but apparently thought better of it. Very well. The day after tomorrow, then. I'll secure accommodations in town tonight and return to assist with your departure. After Reynolds had ridden back toward Pine Ridge, an uncomfortable silence fell between Della and Preston. The children, sensing the tension, retreated to the house, leaving the adults alone by the corral. So, Preston said finally, your cousin found you. It seems so, Della replied, unable to read his expression in the gathering dusk. I never expected her to send someone looking for us. I wrote to her before we left St. Louis, but I had no way of knowing if the letter arrived. Preston nodded, his jaw tight. Reynolds seems capable. Preston, Della began, stepping closer. About what you were saying earlier, it doesn't matter now, he interrupted, his voice suddenly distant. Your cousin is expecting you. The children will have family in Colfax. Della felt a surge of frustration. It does matter. You were asking me to stay, weren't you? Here at Flynn Ranch. Preston turned to face her fully, the setting sun casting long shadows across his features. Yes, he said simply. I was. As what, Preston? Your housekeeper? Your friend? As my wife, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Della's breath caught in her throat. Your wife. Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of uncharacteristic nervousness. I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely 2 weeks. You probably think I'm crazy or worse. I don't think you're crazy, Della whispered. I haven't done this right, Preston continued, as if he hadn't heard her. I should have courted you proper, with permission from your family and, Preston, Della interrupted, stepping closer until she could place a hand on his arm. I'm a widow with 3 children and no prospects. I think we're well past conventional courtship. A flicker of hope crossed his face. Does that mean you're considering it? Della took a deep breath. I don't know. This is unexpected. I need to think. And there's Cousin Helena now, and the children to consider. Preston nodded, covering her hand with his own. Of course. Think on it. Talk to your children. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. But as they walked back to the house together, Della knew that whatever decision she made would have to come quickly. Mr. Reynolds would return in 2 days, expecting to escort them to Colfax. And once they left Flynn Ranch, she suspected there would be no coming back. That night, after the children were asleep, Della sat alone on the porch, Preston's journal open on her lap. Instead of writing, however, she found herself staring at the stars scattered across the vast Nebraska sky, weighing the unexpected choice before her. The sound of bootsteps on wood made her look up. Preston emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like this," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." She accepted gratefully, the warmth of the cup welcome against the night's growing chill. Preston settled into the chair beside hers, his presence comfortingly familiar despite the newness of their relationship. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. "I never planned to marry again," Della said finally. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. My only concern was providing for the children." Preston nodded, his profile illuminated by the moonlight. "I never planned to marry at all," he admitted. "Not after Katherine." Della turned to him, surprised. "Katherine?" Preston stared into his coffee as if seeing something beyond it. "My fiancée. 15 years ago now. We were to be married that spring, but she took sick during the winter. Pneumonia. She was gone in a week." "Oh, Preston," Della breathed. "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, the gesture belying the pain evident in his voice. "After that, I headed west. Couldn't bear to stay in Illinois with the memories. Worked as a ranch hand, then a trail guide. Eventually saved enough to buy this place. Never looked back. Until now." Della asked softly. Preston met her gaze. "Until you and your children showed up in that storm. Turned everything upside down. I'm sorry for the disruption," she said, not entirely sure if he meant it as a complaint. "Don't be." His voice gentled. "Best thing that's happened to me in years." Della felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "The children adore you," she said. "Especially Samuel. He's never taken to anyone so quickly. He's a fine boy. All your children are." Preston hesitated, then added, "I know I'm not their father, and I wouldn't try to replace him in their hearts. But I do right by them, Della. I swear it." "I believe you," she said, and she did. In the short time they'd known him, Preston had shown himself to be honorable, kind, and steady, everything a mother could want for her children. "What about your cousin in Colfax?" Preston asked. "Is she expecting you to live with her?" Della sighed. "Helena wrote that we could stay with her until I found my feet. She mentioned a position as a seamstress in town that might suit me. But I've never been close with Helena. We haven't seen each other since we were girls." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you want, Della?" "Not for the children, not for your cousin. For yourself." It was a question she rarely allowed herself to consider. What did she want? Security, yes. A home for her children. But beyond that, "I want peace," she said slowly. "A place where I'm not constantly afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Work that matters. And," she hesitated, then continued softly, "I want companionship. Someone to share the burden and the joy." "I can offer you that," Preston said. "All of it. This ranch isn't grand, but it's profitable and growing. The house needs a woman's touch, but it's solid. Pine Ridge is a good community, you saw that today. The children would have school, friends." "And us?" Della asked, her heart racing. "What would we have?" Preston set his coffee aside and turned fully toward her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "A partnership, friendship to start, and in time perhaps more. I'm not a poetic man, Della. I can't promise romance like in those novels Emma reads. But I can promise respect, loyalty, and my complete dedication to your happiness and the children's well-being." Della studied him, this man who had come so unexpectedly into their lives. He wasn't Thomas, would never be Thomas, but perhaps that wasn't what she needed now. Thomas had been young, impulsive, full of dreams but short on practicality. Preston was steadfast, responsible, a man who built something enduring from nothing. "I would need to speak with the children," she said finally. "Their feelings matter in this." Hope flickered in Preston's eyes. "Of course. And I would want us to be clear about expectations," she continued. "If we did this, if I agreed to stay as your wife, it would be a real marriage, Preston. Not just an arrangement of convenience." His gaze intensified. "That's what I want too, Della. A true marriage in every sense." The implications of his words sent a flush of warmth through her. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as a woman, not just a mother. The idea that this man, this strong, honorable man, desired her was both frightening and exhilarating. "May I?" Preston asked softly, reaching for her hand. Della nodded, her breath catching as his calloused fingers entwined with hers. The simple touch sent a current of awareness through her body. "I know this is sudden," he said, "and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I believe we could build something good here, Della. For you, for the children, for us." Della looked at their joined hands, then up at Preston's face, open and honest in the moonlight. "I believe that too," she whispered. Preston's expression softened with relief and something deeper. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Della closed her eyes as his lips met hers, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. It was a kiss of promise, of possibility, and when they finally drew apart, Della knew her decision was already made. Morning brought clarity and a sense of purpose. After breakfast, Della gathered her children in the small room they shared. "I need to speak with you about something important," she began, looking at their curious faces. "Mr. Reynolds wants to take us to Cousin Helena's home in Colfax." "But I don't want to go," Samuel said immediately. "I like it here. Mr. Preston is teaching me about horses." Emma was more thoughtful. "Is Cousin Helena expecting us, Mama?" "Yes, she is," Della acknowledged. "But we have another option." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Preston has asked us to stay here permanently. He's asked me to marry him." The children absorbed this with varying reactions. Samuel looked delighted, Michael confused, and Emma wary. "Would he be our new papa?" Michael asked. "He would be my husband," Della explained carefully. "And he would care for us and provide a home for us. He's not trying to replace your father, but he would be a father figure in your lives." "Do you love him, Mama?" Emma asked, her young face serious. It was the question Della had been asking herself all night. "I care for him deeply," she said honestly. "Love can grow with time. I believe we could be happy here with Preston." "But what about school?" Emma persisted. "And our plans to go to Colorado?" "There's a good school right here in Pine Ridge," Della said. "You could start with the new term. As for Colorado, we were going there because we had nowhere else to go. Now we have a choice." The children looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that Della couldn't quite interpret. "I want to stay," Samuel said firmly. "Me too," Michael chimed in. "I like Mr. Preston. And the puppies at the farm." Emma was the last to speak. "Would we have our own rooms?" In Cousin Helena's letter, she said her house has lots of rooms. "We would make space," Della promised. "Preston and I discussed it last night. The ranch house isn't large, but he's willing to build an addition if we need it." Emma nodded slowly. "I'd miss my friends in St. Louis, but I haven't seen them in months anyway." Her expression brightened slightly. "And the school did look nice." Della felt a weight lift from her heart. "So you wouldn't be upset if we stayed?" If Preston became part of our family. Samuel shook his head emphatically. Emma shrugged, which from her was as good as agreement. Only Michael had a further question. Will we have to call him Papa? You can call him Preston for as long as you like, Della assured him. He understands that your papa will always be your papa, even though he's gone to heaven. Satisfied with this answer, the children dispersed Samuel to find Preston, Emma to continue the book she'd been reading, and Michael to play with the carved wooden animals Preston had made for him. Della found Preston in the barn, brushing down his favorite mare. Samuel was already there, attentively handing Preston brushes as needed. There you are, Preston said, his expression questioning. I was just telling Samuel about the cattle drive coming up next month. Can I go, Mama? Samuel asked eagerly. Mr. Preston says I could help with the camp duties. Della smiled, her heart full at the sight of them together. We'll see. Preston, could I speak with you? Understanding crossed his face. Samuel, why don't you finish brushing Bella? Remember, long strokes in the direction of her coat. When they were alone outside the barn, Preston's expression grew serious. You've made your decision. It wasn't a question, but Della answered anyway. Yes, I've spoken with the children. She took a deep breath. We'd like to stay, Preston, if your offer still stands. Joy transformed his weathered face. It does, he said firmly, taking her hands in his. Are you certain, Della? I don't want you to feel pressured because of Reynolds showing up. I'm certain, she said, squeezing his hands. It won't be easy. We hardly know each other. There will be adjustments on all sides. We'll take it day by day, Preston promised. One step at a time. Della nodded, then asked the practical question that had been on her mind. What about Mr. Reynolds? He'll be back tomorrow, expecting to take us to Colfax. I'll ride into town today, speak with him, Preston said. Explain the situation, and we should send word to your cousin. Let her know you're safe but have made other arrangements. Yes, of course, Della agreed. I'll write to her immediately. Preston's expression softened as he looked at her. There's one more thing, Della. I don't want to wait. Life's too uncertain out here. If you're willing, I'd like us to marry before Reynolds leaves town. So soon. Della's heart raced at the thought. The preacher comes through Pine Ridge every other Sunday, Preston explained. He's due tomorrow. We could be married then, make it official before Reynolds returns to Colorado. Unless you'd prefer to wait. Della considered this. A quick wedding wasn't what she'd imagined. But then, nothing about her life had gone as imagined lately. And there was wisdom in Preston's suggestion it would resolve any questions about her decision and prevent potential complications with Cousin Helena. Tomorrow, then, she agreed, surprising herself with her certainty. But I have no proper dress, and there's so much to arrange. Leave the arrangements to me, Preston said, a rare smile lighting his face. As for a dress, I suspect Mrs. Baxter at the general store would be delighted to help. She's been trying to marry me off for years. Della laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Very well, Mr. Flynn. It seems we have a wedding to prepare for. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Preston rode into town to speak with Mr. Reynolds and make arrangements with the preacher, while Della explained the sudden change of plans to the children. To her relief, they took the news with excitement rather than apprehension, particularly when Preston returned with gifts for each of them: a proper hat for Samuel, a new doll for Emma, and a wooden toy train for Michael. Mr. Reynolds had been surprisingly understanding, according to Preston. Said he figured something was brewing when he saw us together, Preston reported. Offered his congratulations and said he'd tell your cousin the good news himself. Mrs. Baxter, as Preston had predicted, was overjoyed at the prospect of his marriage and immediately closed her store to help Della select fabric for a simple, but elegant wedding dress that she and Emma worked on late into the night. Sunday morning dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of their hastily arranged ceremony. The news had spread quickly through Pine Ridge, and despite the short notice, it seemed half the town had gathered at the small white church to witness the union of the reclusive rancher and the widow with 3 children who had literally blown into his life on a stormy night. Dr. Miller stood as Preston's best man, while Mrs. Baxter fussed over Della's appearance in the church anteroom. The children had been scrubbed to gleaming, Samuel solemn in his responsibility as the man of his mother's family, Emma pretty in a freshly pressed dress, and Michael barely containing his excitement at the festivities. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Baxter declared, adjusting the simple veil they had fashioned from lace curtains. "Preston Flynn won't know what hit him." Della studied her reflection in the small mirror. The dress was ivory rather than white, befitting a widow, but the cut was flattering, emphasizing her slender waist and the gentle curves that motherhood had given her. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, with wildflowers woven through the braids. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Baxter," Della said sincerely. "I never expected such kindness from strangers." "Pish," the older woman said, waving away her thanks. "We take care of our own in Pine Ridge. And you're one of us now." She patted Della's hand. "Besides, you're doing us all a favor, marrying that stubborn man. He's been alone too long." The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Della would always remember the look on Preston's face when she walked down the aisle toward him, her children preceding her with solemn importance. His blue eyes were bright with an emotion that might have been tears, had he been a man given to such displays. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, spoke of new beginnings and of the family they were forming together. When it came time for the vows, Preston's voice was steady and sure, while Della's trembled slightly with the enormity of what they were undertaking. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared finally. "Mr. Flynn, you may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was gentle but possessive, a promise of things to come that sent warmth spreading through Della's body. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Preston Flynn, the cheers and well wishes from the townsfolk made it clear that they had the community's full support. The celebration continued at the town hall, where the ladies of Pine Ridge had prepared a feast that would have done credit to a wedding planned for months rather than hours. There was dancing and laughter, and Della found herself surrounded by new neighbors eager to welcome her to their community. Throughout it all, Preston remained close, his hand often finding the small of her back or her fingers entwining with his, as if he couldn't quite believe she was really his. "Happy?" he asked quietly, during a rare moment alone as they watched the children playing with other youngsters from town. "Yes," Della said, realizing with some surprise that it was absolutely true. "Are you?" Preston's answer was a kiss, brief but tender, mindful of their public setting but leaving no doubt of his feelings. As the afternoon waned, they thanked their guests and prepared to return to the ranch, their home now, truly. Mr. Reynolds approached as they were readying to leave. "Mrs. Flynn," he said, tipping his hat to Della, "I wish you and your husband every happiness. I've written to Mrs. Barrett explaining the circumstances. I'm sure she'll understand." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Della said. "Please tell Cousin Helena that she's welcome to visit us any time." "I shall," he promised. "And Mr. Flynn, you're a fortunate man." Preston's arm tightened around Della's waist. "Don't I know it?" The ride back to the ranch was filled with the children's excited chatter about their new friends and the festivities. By the time they arrived, the younger two were drooping with exhaustion, and even Samuel could barely keep his eyes open. "Into bed with you 3, Della said, shepherding them inside. "It's been a long day." "But Mama, it's your wedding day," Emma protested through a yawn. "Don't you and Preston want to celebrate more?" Della exchanged a glance with Preston, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. We have our whole lives to celebrate, sweetheart. Tonight, sleep is what we all need. After tucking the children into their beds, Della found herself suddenly nervous. The reality of their hasty marriage was setting in. Tonight she would share Preston's bed as his wife. Though they had discussed the physical aspects of marriage briefly, the actual moment was now upon them. She changed into her nightgown, her best one, thankfully packed in the trunk Preston had salvaged from their wagon, and brushed her hair until it shone. Taking a deep breath, she opened the bedroom door. Preston stood by the window, having removed his jacket and boots but otherwise still dressed. He turned as she entered, his expression softening at the sight of her. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind," he said, his attempt at humor not quite hiding his own nervousness. "No," Della said softly, closing the door behind her. "Just gathering my courage." Preston crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Della, we don't have to. That is, I understand if you need time. This has all happened so quickly." His consideration touched her deeply. "It has been quick," she agreed. "But I don't want to wait, Preston. I want to be your wife in every way." Relief and desire flashed across his face. "I want that too," he admitted, raising one hand to cup her cheek. "I just don't want you to feel rushed or obligated." Della leaned into his touch. I feel chosen and cherished." Preston's breath caught. "You are," he whispered, before lowering his mouth to hers. Their previous kisses had been tender, exploratory. This one was different, deeper, hungrier. Della wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer as his hands spanned her waist, then slid upward to trace the curve of her spine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he murmured. "It's been a very long time for me." "For me as well," Della admitted. Thomas had been gone over half a year, and before that, his illness had precluded intimacy for months. "Then we'll learn together," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Day by day, remember?" "Day by day," Della agreed, as he drew her toward the bed that would now be theirs. Later, lying in Preston's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Della marveled at the strange turns life could take. 3 weeks ago, she had been a desperate widow with dwindling options, lost on the prairie with 3 hungry children. Now she was Mrs. Preston Flynn, with a home, a husband who treated her with tenderness and respect, and a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than dread. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to be happy again," Della answered truthfully. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Preston tightened his arms around her. "And now," Della raised herself on one elbow to look at him, this man who had so unexpectedly become central to her existence. "Now I think perhaps the best parts are just beginning." The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and gradually the Flynn household settled into a rhythm that encompassed all its members. The children thrived in their new environment, Samuel following Preston everywhere he was permitted, learning the ways of the ranch with dedicated enthusiasm. Emma excelling at the Pine Ridge School, where she quickly became a favorite of Miss Abernathy, and Michael growing sturdy and confident under the combined attention of his mother and new stepfather. As for Della and Preston, their hastily formed union deepened into a partnership of genuine affection and respect. Preston proved to be a considerate husband, attentive to Della's needs and mindful of her opinions in all matters relating to the ranch and family. For her part, Della brought warmth and order to a home that had been functional but Spartan, turning the ranch house into a true family dwelling with thoughtful touches that reflected her growing attachment not just to Preston but to the land itself. Their physical relationship, initially tentative, blossomed into a source of mutual pleasure and connection that sometimes left Della breathless with gratitude for this unexpected second chance at love. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements, particularly regarding the children. Preston sometimes struggled to understand the fine line between discipline and nurturing, while Della occasionally found it difficult to accept his more pragmatic approach to raising them in the demanding environment of the frontier. But they learned to compromise, to discuss their differences privately and present a united front to the children. Winter arrived with a ferocity that surprised even Preston, bringing snowstorms that isolated the ranch for days at a time. These periods of enforced seclusion brought the family closer, with evenings spent around the fire telling stories, teaching the children games from their own childhoods, and planning for the future. It was during one such snowbound evening, with the children already asleep and Della mending by the fire, that Preston broached a subject they had discussed only in general terms before. "I've been thinking," he said, setting aside the ledger where he'd been calculating the spring cattle prospects. "We should consider expanding the house come spring." Della glanced up from her sewing. "Oh? What did you have in mind?" "Another bedroom at least," Preston said. "The children are growing. Samuel will be 11 soon. He'll want his own space before long. And Emma shouldn't have to share with Michael forever." "That's thoughtful of you," Della said, touched by his consideration for her children's comfort. "But it's a significant undertaking. Are you sure we can afford it?" Preston moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "The ranch is doing well. Last year's cattle prices were strong, and I've got contracts for the spring drive that will put us ahead. Besides," he added, taking her hand, "we might need the room for other reasons." Della set her sewing aside, her heart quickening. "What reasons?" Preston's eyes, so often guarded with others but increasingly open with her, held a mix of hope and vulnerability. "I've been thinking it might be nice for Samuel, Emma, and Michael to have a little brother or sister. If you're willing." Della's breath caught. They hadn't actively prevented conception in their marriage, but neither had they specifically discussed having children together. At 32, Della had assumed her family was complete, yet the idea of a child with Preston, a tangible representation of their union, filled her with unexpected longing. "You want a baby?" she asked softly. Preston nodded, his expression serious. "I do. But only if you do too, Della. I know you've already raised 3 children largely on your own. I wouldn't ask you to take on more if your heart isn't in it." Della squeezed his hand, tears pricking her eyes at his consideration. "My heart is very much in it," she assured him. "I would love to have a child with you, Preston." Relief and joy crossed his face. "Yeah. Yes," she confirmed, laughing at his boyish response. "Though at my age it might not happen right away. Or at all." Preston pulled her into his embrace. "Then we'll just have to practice diligently," he murmured against her hair, making her blush. "The children will be thrilled," Della said, imagining their reactions. "Especially Michael, he's always wanted to be a big brother." "And you?" Preston asked, drawing back to study her face. "Are you truly happy with the idea?" Della touched his cheek, her heart full of love for this man who had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I am. More than I can say." His kiss was tender, full of promise, and as he led her to their bedroom, Della felt a sense of rightness that confirmed they were exactly where they were meant to be. Spring arrived late but gloriously, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a riot of green and wildflowers. With the thaw came increased activity not just on the ranch, with calving season and preparations for the cattle drive, but in their personal lives as well. Cousin Helena, having recovered from her initial surprise at Della's sudden marriage, announced her intention to visit. "She'll be here next month," Della told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. "She says she's curious to meet the man who swept me off my feet." Preston snorted. Hardly swept you off your feet. More like offered you shelter from a storm. And then asked me to stay forever. Della reminded him with a smile. That's romantic enough for any novel. Preston looked pleased despite himself. Well, we'll make your cousin welcome. It'll be good for the children to meet more of their family. Della leaned against his shoulder, savoring the solid warmth of him. Thank you. I know it's an imposition. It's not, he assured her. This is your home, Della. Your family is always welcome here. His words warmed her heart, as did his obvious commitment to embracing not just her but everything that came with her. It was one of the many reasons she had fallen in love with him, his capacity for acceptance, for making room in his life for people who needed it. The visit from Cousin Helena proved less stressful than Della had feared. Though initially reserved, Helena warmed to Preston after seeing his obvious devotion to Della and the children. By the end of her 2-week stay, she had become an enthusiastic supporter of their union. I'll admit I had my doubts when Mr. Reynolds brought news of your marriage, Helena confided to Della the night before her departure. It seemed so hasty, but seeing you together with the children. You made the right choice, Della. He's a good man. The best? Della agreed, glancing across the room where Preston was patiently teaching Samuel and Helena's husband Edward the finer points of poker, using beans instead of money to Emma's amusement. And you're happy here? Helena pressed. Truly happy? It's so different from St. Louis. Della considered the question seriously. I am. I miss certain conveniences, of course. The theater, bookshops, but there are compensations. The community here is strong. The children are thriving. And Preston. She smiled softly. Preston makes me feel safe and valued in a way I never expected to experience again. Helena patted her hand. Then that's all that matters. Though I must say, she added with a mischievous glint, I rather hope your next letter brings news of an addition to the family. Those children of yours deserve a little brother or sister. Della felt heat rise to her cheeks, thankful that the oil lamp's dim light concealed her blush. Perhaps, she murmured noncommittally, though in truth, she had begun to suspect that their wishes in that direction might already be coming to fruition. Her monthly courses were late, and there was a familiar tenderness to her breasts that she remembered from her previous pregnancies. She hadn't mentioned her suspicions to Preston yet, wanting to be more certain before raising his hopes. But watching him now, his easy way with the children, the quiet confidence with which he managed their expanding household, she felt a rush of love and certainty. This was right. They were right together. 2 days after Helena's departure, Della's suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Miller during a routine visit to town. Congratulations, Mrs. Flynn, the doctor said, his eyes twinkling. I'd say you're about 8 weeks along. Everything appears healthy. Della pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, joy and trepidation mingling. Thank you, doctor. Preston will be pleased, Dr. Miller remarked as he packed away his instruments. He's taken to fatherhood like a duck to water with your 3. A baby of his own will make him insufferable with pride. Della laughed, though her eyes misted slightly at the thought. Yes, I believe it will. She decided to tell Preston that night, after the children were asleep. She prepared his favorite meal, venison stew with dumplings, and wore the blue dress he particularly admired. What's the occasion? Preston asked as they sat down to dinner. Not that I'm complaining about the special treatment. Della smiled mysteriously. I'll tell you later. Later came after the children had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses. Della led Preston to the porch, where the spring night was mild and sweet, scented with wildflowers. Now will you tell me what's going on? Preston asked, drawing her close. You've been smiling secrets all evening. Della took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. We're going to have a baby, she said softly. Dr. Miller confirmed it today. Preston's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. A baby? You're sure? Very sure, Della confirmed. Due in November, he thinks. Preston let out a whoop of joy that surely woke every creature within a mile radius. Before Della could shush him, he had swept her into his arms, spinning her in a circle that left her breathless with laughter. Preston, the children, let them wake, he said recklessly. Let the whole territory wake. My wife is having my baby. Della's laughter turned to happy tears as Preston set her down gently, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Are you happy then? She asked, though the answer was written plainly across his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Preston declared, pulling her close again, more carefully this time. Della Flynn, you have made me the happiest man in Nebraska territory. In all the territories, most likely. His joy was infectious, his tenderness as he touched her still unchanged figure moving beyond words. When he knelt suddenly before her, pressing his lips to her stomach through the fabric of her dress, Della felt such a surge of love that it nearly overwhelmed her. Hello in there, Preston murmured against her belly. I'm your pa. We're mighty glad you're coming to join our family. Della stroked his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. I love you, she whispered. It wasn't the first time she'd said the words. That milestone had been reached some months earlier, but never had they felt more true. Preston looked up at her, his weathered face transformed by emotion. And I love you, Della Flynn, more than I ever thought possible. The news of Della's pregnancy was met with enthusiasm by the children, though with varying degrees of understanding. Michael was simply excited at the prospect of a baby to play with, while Emma had practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether it would cry all night. Samuel, ever thoughtful, seemed to understand the deeper significance of the event. It means we're really a family now, doesn't it? He asked Della privately, after the initial excitement had died down. You and Preston and all of us together. We were already a family, Della assured him, touched by his perception. The baby doesn't change that. Samuel nodded, his young face serious. I know, but it's different too. The baby will be half you and half Preston. Like how me and Emma and Michael are half you and half Papa. Della pulled her eldest son close, marveling at his growing wisdom. That's true. But Preston loves you three just as much as he'll love this baby. You know that, don't you? I know, Samuel said with the confidence of a child who felt secure in his place in the world. He told me so. The conversation reassured Della that the addition to their family would be welcomed by all its members. She set about preparing for the baby's arrival with practical efficiency, sewing tiny garments in the evenings and reorganizing the house to accommodate a nursery in the small room off their bedroom that had previously served as Preston's office. Preston, for his part, accelerated his plans to expand the house, beginning construction on an addition that would eventually provide separate bedrooms for each of the older children and a proper office for the ranch business. The project would take months, but Preston worked on it whenever his ranch duties allowed, often with Samuel's eager assistance. As Della's pregnancy progressed, she found herself embraced by the women of Pine Ridge in a way she hadn't experienced since the early days of her marriage to Thomas. Mrs. Baxter organized a quilting circle to create a special blanket for the coming baby. Miss Abernathy, Emma's teacher, brought books on infant care from her own library. Even the young wife of the new blacksmith, herself expecting her first child, became a friend and confidant as they compared symptoms and preparations. It struck Della, one afternoon as she sat with these women on Mrs. Baxter's porch, shelling peas and discussing the merits of various remedies for morning sickness, how different this pregnancy was from her previous ones. With Samuel, she had been young and terrified, with only Thomas's equally inexperienced support to rely on. With Emma and Michael, They had been slightly more prepared but still largely alone in the experience. Living in a St. Louis neighborhood where neighbors kept to themselves and family was distant. Here in Pine Ridge, she was surrounded by a community that viewed her pregnancy as a collective joy, the baby's impending arrival a cause for general celebration. It was yet another way in which the decision to stay with Preston had blessed her life beyond measure. The summer passed in a haze of ranch work, house building, and the everyday demands of a growing family. Preston's cattle drive was successful, bringing in enough money to ensure their comfort through the coming winter and to complete the house expansion. The children enjoyed the freedom of summer, with Samuel increasingly taking on minor ranch responsibilities, Emma devouring books from the small-town library, and Michael exploring his expanding world with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old. By September, Della's condition was impossible to disguise, her rounded belly preceding her as she moved through her daily tasks. Preston grew increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and delegate household chores to Emma and a young girl from town who came 3 times a week to help. "I'm pregnant, not ill," Della protested one evening when Preston firmly removed a basket of laundry from her hands. "You're carrying precious cargo?" Preston countered, setting the basket aside. "And you were on your feet all day. The washing can wait." Della sighed but allowed him to lead her to the porch swing, where he settled beside her with his arm around her shoulders. "You're going to spoil me," she warned. "That's the plan," Preston agreed amiably, his hand coming to rest on the swell of her stomach. As if in response, the baby kicked vigorously against his palm. "Strong," Preston murmured with pride. "Like his mama." "Or her papa," Della countered, smiling at his assumption it was a boy. Preston claimed no preference for the baby's sex, but Della suspected he secretly hoped for a son, not that he would love a daughter any less. "Either way, this little one is determined to make their presence known," Preston said, chuckling as the baby kicked again. "November seems a long way off." "Not so very long," Della reminded him. "And there's still much to do before then." Preston kissed her temple. "All in good time. For now, just rest." Della leaned against him, savoring the moment of peace as the sun set over the Nebraska plains. These quiet evenings with Preston had become her favorite part of the day, a time to connect, to share the small triumphs and challenges of their life together, to simply be husband and wife rather than ranch owners, parents, and community members. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For saying stay that night. For seeing something worth keeping in a bedraggled widow and her 3 children." Preston's arm tightened around her. "I should be thanking you for saying yes. For trusting a stranger with your future and your children's well-being." Della turned her face up to his. "Not a stranger. Even then, somehow, you didn't feel like a stranger." "No," Preston agreed softly. "You felt like someone I'd been waiting for without realizing it." Their kiss was gentle, familiar now but no less meaningful for its ease. When they parted, Della rested her head on his shoulder, content in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The baby arrived 2 weeks early, on a crisp November morning just as dawn was breaking over the plains. Preston, who had been sitting vigil by Della's bedside through a long night of labor, nearly wore a hole in the porch floorboards as he paced while Dr. Miller and Mrs. Baxter attended to the delivery. Samuel, Emma, and Michael had been sent to stay with friends in town the previous evening when Della's pains began in earnest. Now, as a newborn's cry pierced the morning stillness, Preston froze mid-pace, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door opened, and Mrs. Baxter emerged, her round face wreathed in smiles despite her exhaustion. "Congratulations, Mr. Flynn. You have a fine, healthy daughter." Preston stared at her for a moment, then found his voice. "And Della? Is she tired but well?" Mrs. Baxter assured him. "Dr. Miller says it was a remarkably smooth delivery. especially considering it's her fourth. You can go in now. Preston didn't need to be told twice. He entered the bedroom to find Della propped up against the pillows, her face pale but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the quilt the women of Pine Ridge had made. "Preston," she said softly, looking up with tired eyes full of joy. "Come meet your daughter." He approached the bed almost reverently, perching carefully on its edge as Della tilted the bundle toward him. A tiny face, red and wrinkled but perfect in every detail, peeked out from the blankets. Wisps of dark hair clung to a delicate head, and as Preston watched, amazed, the baby's eyes opened briefly unfocused, newborn blue, but unmistakably alert. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his daughter's cheek. "Like her mother." Della smiled, tears of happiness spilling down her face. "Would you like to hold her?" Preston hesitated only briefly before nodding. Della carefully transferred the precious bundle into his arms, adjusting his hold to support the baby's head. "There," she said. "You're a natural." Preston stared down at his daughter, a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him rushing through his chest. In all his life, he had never felt anything like it this instant, all-consuming devotion to the tiny being in his arms. He had grown to love Samuel, Emma, and Michael deeply over the past year. But this was different, a primal connection that stunned him with its intensity. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." Della watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. This moment, this perfect, sacred moment was worth every hardship, every tear, every difficult decision that had led them here. "What shall we call her?" she asked. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any, wanting to meet their child before deciding. Preston looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I was thinking, if you wouldn't mind, Katherine, after my first Katherine, who never had the chance to live her life." Della reached out to squeeze his arm, deeply touched by the suggestion. "Katherine is beautiful. Katherine Flynn." "Katherine Hope Flynn," Preston amended. "Because that's what she is to me. Hope for the future we're building together." "Katherine Hope," Della agreed, her voice catching. "It's perfect." Dr. Miller poked his head in the door. "The proud father holding up all right?" Preston grinned, not bothering to hide the tears that had escaped down his weathered cheeks. "Never better, document." "Good, good," the doctor said. "Mrs. Baxter's making breakfast. You should eat, both of you. And Mrs. Flynn needs rest after her exertions." He crossed to the bed, checking Della's pulse with practiced efficiency. "Everything looks fine, but I want you to take it easy for at least a week. Let Preston and the others handle things." "I'll see to it," Preston promised, carefully handing Katherine back to Della. Nothing is more important than their well-being. After the doctor and Mrs. Baxter had departed, promising to send word to town about the baby's arrival, Preston stretched out on the bed beside Della, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their sleeping daughter. "Thank you," he said softly, pressing a kiss to Della's temple. "For what?" "For her. For them. For everything." Preston's voice was rough with emotion. "A year ago, I was alone in this house, convinced that was how I'd always be. Now look at us." Della leaned into him, her own heart overflowing with gratitude. "It's remarkable how life can change in an instant. One storm, one act of kindness. One decision to stay," Preston finished for her. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to stay that night. Best decision I ever made, saying yes," Della countered, smiling up at him. As Katherine stirred in her arms, making the little mewling sounds of a newborn settling, Della thought of all the paths not taken, all the possibilities that had narrowed to this one perfect outcome. Had her wagon will not broken, Had the storm not driven them to Preston's door? Had he not offered shelter and then something far more precious, a home, a partnership, a future, none of this would exist. "I love you," she whispered. The words simple but carrying the weight of everything they had become to each other. Preston's arms tightened around her and Katherine. "And I love you, Della Flynn. Both of you. All of you." In that moment, surrounded by the family they had built together, the three children who would soon return home eager to meet their new sister, and the tiny daughter who represented their shared future, Della knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The mother who had lost her way had found not just shelter but a home, not just guidance but a partnership, not just safety but love. And the cowboy who had said, "Stay," that stormy night had gained not just a housekeeper but a wife, not just companions but a family, not just purpose but joy. Together, on the vast Nebraska prairie, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love that would sustain them through all the seasons to come.